Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? I'm Sam. I'm from product management in Google, and I'll be telling you about zero trust access today. And I'll be joined shortly by Adam and Gagan, who are here. Adam is from Deliveroo, and he'll be telling us about his experiences implementing some of the stuff I'll be talking about. And Gagan will actually be showing you what this stuff looks like. Um, so zero trust actually, the agenda which will follow basically is I'll tell you about a new cloud security model, which is like what's the zero trust about, what are the trends causing us to, as an industry, to move in this direction. And we have some tools. I'll tell you a little bit about the tools Google has. And then Adam will talk to you about Deliveroo's experience, both the good and the bad. And in fact, as I finish, Gagan will come up and show you these tools in action, and then Adam will show you how they implemented it. And finally, we'll come back and talk a little bit about how you could get started on this journey yourself. So the problem today is that the reason you build information systems is for people to access them. So access is sort of a central existential thing. And today, the distinction between access and remote access and all are just going away. Because on one hand, users have left the building. They work from everywhere. But often, applications have also moved. So you might have moved your application to a cloud. You might be using a SaaS. Obviously, you're going to have a bunch of on-prem. And furthermore, employees are of many kinds, or users, rather. So you might have a contractor who sits in your office. And should they get the same access as an employee does? Or you might have an employee who sits in your customer's office and works, and they need to get access to all your information resources. And so basically, we need a solution for these. And of course, you have situations where people bring their own devices, like a contractor might come with their laptop, needs to access your information system. What do? So the old paradigm doesn't work anymore. So there are various words for this. It's called perimeterless and so on. Actually, that's probably a misnomer. It's about the perimeter shrinking. You want to keep the perimeter only around your resources and treat everything else as if it's outside the perimeter. So in fact, it's about a more secure perimeter than before. And so the right solution you really want in this world of applications being everywhere, users being of various types, and users being everywhere, is that you want to solve the problem at its very core. And the problem at the very core is you have an information resource. For example, you have a finance system. You want to get the right person, perhaps someone in your finance group, to access it in the right context. So the context would be, how sure am I that it's the right finance person? Have they been phished? Is their device got malware? Are they in my country? Let's say it's a country rule saying you can only access it from inside the country. In that context, you should be able to make a decision for that application way up the stack, not at opening ports and firewalls and things along those lines. That's what we really want. And this is what basically zero trust access is about. And in Google, we built a solution for this driven by the fact that we're constantly under attack for our internal employees over many years. And it's called the BeyondCorp product. And in fact, there are a bunch of papers. You should go and take a look at them. Just Google BeyondCorp. And we learned from this. And we have productized some of these. So when you go through the same journey, hopefully you can get a much faster start because some of our lessons are just built into like a packaged service for you. So stepping back, this is even before we talk about Google's products, if you want this notion of zero trust access, what are the components that you actually need? And you should think of it as a comprehensive solution for applications you might own, like web applications. They could be on-prem, on any cloud. There could be VMs you need to SSH to, SaaS applications like which you are purchasing, and your API as an infrastructure. That is, you should be able to say, for example, this production API only from a well-managed laptop, only by my NetAdmin group, and with strong second factor. You should be able to say that, and something should make it so. So what you need a notion of who the user is. You need user trust, so in a sense of identity, understanding of the user, security and behavior. You need device trust. You need to understand what device are they using, what is it patched, what version of the OS, where are they, and things along those lines. Then the overall context, where is the access coming from? Are they in a restricted country right now when they're making the access? All of this feeds into a rule decision that you make. So a decision like I said before, this application can be accessed only by finance employees in France, let's say. That rules engine is where the rules are and makes an enforcement decision, which is enforced with an enforcement point, which is typically a proxy. And, so a proxy meaning it's what seems to be the application to the end user, but it's making a decision before allowing the access to go back to the real application. So we have a solution components for all of this in Google Cloud. So we have this very powerful identity system called Cloud Identity, which can federate to your SSO system. You might have Okta, you might have Active Directory, or if you like, it can also act as a primary identity system, but it can understand what group your users are in. It can even enforce secondary second factor. So you can say things like, you know, I know my primary second factor happened in my IDP, but when they come to do this particular API or this particular application, I want them to have like a unphishable second factor with a security key, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So you can do things like that. We have endpoint verification. We can monitor in a lightweight way device status, and which you can correlate with like deeper endpoint monitoring systems, like you might have CrowdStrike or Symantec. But we can get you the basic endpoint on your device in a very lightweight, self-install fashion. Obviously, a proxy understands the context. What time of the day is it? Where are you coming from? So you can write rules like only from Germany by just choosing Germany in the drop-down. And we have these proxies. It's called, you see this Cloud IAP, Cloud IAM. Let's not worry about all the alphabet soup there. But basically, the point is, if you use a GCP API, which is our IaaS, you can write the rules of the context of things I said. If you use G Suite, for example, using Google Drive, you can say Google Drive only from a well-managed machine, if you like. Or if you're using any of your web applications or SSH, so let's focus on web applications. Probably many of you have them. It doesn't matter where they're running. They could be running on-prem. They could be running on AWS, on Azure, maybe on GCP. We can basically act as a front end, which gives you what we call context-aware access. And the context is like the holistic notion of all the stuff I talked about, who you are, device, and things along those lines. So, so once again, you looking at the picture on the right, the solution works for our GCP APIs today, for G Suite today, and for any web application that you have, and for SSH right now. And basically, let's, having said all this, let's see what it really feels like. And for that, I'm going to hand over to Gagan and ask him to show us.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gagan Arora, and I'm a product manager in Google Cloud. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through how you can set context-aware access in your organization today. I know most of you are already using it, and some have played with it. Most of it has gone to GA now, so I would really encourage you to go back and deploy some of these rules. I'm going to go through 3 primary use cases. The first one being context-aware access for G Suite, how you can configure it and then manage it in your admin console. The second one is around, if you want to deploy a device policy for context-aware access, how would you get started? Like, what are the things that needs to be deployed on the endpoint, and how would you go about doing it? And number 3 is, if you want to deploy context-aware access for your own applications, not just the G Suite applications. So I'll walk you through all these 3 use cases over the next few minutes. So the first use case that I mentioned is context-aware access for G Suite. And this has been in beta for a few months now, and many of you has already tried it out. So the good news is it's now in GA. So if you're waiting for the product to go GA, please go back and try it out again. One of the most common use cases that we have seen across many, many customers with context-aware access for G Suite is they have a lot of sensitive data in their drive and docs. And they're looking to make sure that any user who's trying to access that data is coming from a device that has appropriate security on it. Excuse me. So let's see how you will set that configuration and a rule in your familiar admin console. So in your admin console, if you go to your dashboard with security panel, now you will see a new card called Context-Aware Access. Once you get inside, you'll see 3 different sections. Number 1, you need to define access levels, which is just a bunch of conditions that will define the security posture of your organization. It could be things like device policy, IP policy, things like that. The second one is you will assign that to a set of users and a set of applications. And the last one is you will define what your end users will see if they do not comply with the policy that you have applied for them. So let's look at how you will define the access level first. So in this case, you can go and select your IP subnet. And this is a very popular use case where you can define the IP boundaries on where users can come from. It could be your corporate network, or it could be contractor's corporate network, and things like that. You could also define that somebody must come from a specific country. Now, this could be based on your internal company policy, compliance, or regulation, or anything, so on and so forth. The last one I wanted to show you is the device policy. And here you can start to enforce things like the device must be encrypted, it must have password on, and the Mac OS version is, say, higher than 10.14.5. You can also enforce that the device must be company-owned, or it is approved by admin before it's accessing your corporate data. The next one is applying that access level. And for this demo, I chose Analyst as my OU that I'm applying it to, and Drive as my application, because that's the use case we are trying to solve. Once you have defined this policy, the next thing I will do is go and provide a message that the end users will see when they get denied access because of the policy that I, as an admin, is applying. So this could be your internal internet address, or it could be your admin address that they can contact. So let's see Dan, who's an end user in the organization, in the analyst organization. He's trying to access Drive and Docs from a Mac, which has a password on, it's encrypted, and his OS version is 10.14.6. So everything checks out. He gets access to his drive and can access the documents. Now, let's say a vulnerability has hit, and you want to make sure all Mac devices that are accessing your drive now have at least 10.14.8, which is the latest patch version. In this case, all you have to do is go back to your access level, update it to 10.14.8, and hit save. And this will trickle down to wherever this access level was being used for the context-aware access policy. So Dan is still logged in. He's working through his session. And anything he clicks next, he will be denied access and will see the message that you have configured for Dan. So as you can see, it's a fairly small, few minutes process. You can pick a set of users, some applications that your users are already using, and start configuring these rules today. One of the most common questions that we get asked is, you're collecting all these device attributes and applying context-aware access policy for it. Is there something that needs to be installed on our machines? The answer is yes. You need to have endpoint verification, which is also a Google product and a Chrome plugin that needs to be installed on these devices. The good news is you can download it from the Chrome Web Store and push it to your end users, or you can ask the end users to download and install it themselves. Once installed, you will see an icon on your browser that says the endpoint is installed and everything is working fine. And from that point on, you can start to look at the device inventory of that device. You can go back to your admin console, go into your devices panel. And when you go to the endpoint verification section, now you will see all the devices that have endpoint verification installed in it. And this gives you the capability, even if you're not using context-aware access, to get a sense of who's exactly using the machine that was handed out to a user. It gives you various other parameters, like password, what's the status of the encryption, and so on and so forth. One new thing that we just introduced is fundamental desktop management. And this allows you to see which desktop devices are accessing your G Suite data, and even the devices that do not have endpoint verification on. And this is very, very useful for you to actually see who's accessing my G Suite data, and then you can use that information to send them an email, letting them know of the company policy, or in some cases, you can tell them that go and download this endpoint verification. Without that, you might not get access. Now, the things that we talked about, I just talked about G Suite so far. The exact same context-aware access works for your own applications as well. It's the same platform, as Sam mentioned, same underlying infrastructure that we have built that you can use against different enforcement points in your organization. So let's look at a quick use case on your own application. So imagine it's a made-up company, Zotkicks.com, and they have an HR application that they want to expose to the contractors. And the HR department wants to make sure that the contractors are only accessing this application when they're in their office and they're using their own company devices. And this is primarily needed because they want contractors to fill out some data in the application, and they want to give access. And imagine that the contractor is actually not even in the same country. It could be in some other country as well. So in the past, the solutions that were available to us are really not practical for this use case, right? So you could start to think of, I can use VPN, but again, you don't want to do that with contractors in most cases. Or you can fly them in, which again is not a very practical solution. IAP, along with context-aware access, solves this use case beautifully. And it can also solve your security department concerns, right? So for Zotkicks' case, the security department wants to make sure that the user, the contractor, is actually coming in with strong authentication, and they must be coming in from their corporate location. So let's see how this will be done for a contractor who is sitting in a different location, right? So Kelly is in acme.com, which is a contractor corporate location. And she's trying to access this HR application that we have provided for her. She's asked for login password and also for the strong authentication, the security key. Now, Kelly does not, we don't have to send any key to her. She can purchase her own key and then register that key for the second factor authentication. Now, let's say Kelly does not know what the company policy was, so she walks over to the nearby Starbucks, and she tries to connect to the same application from Starbucks. So she's now connected to Starbucks, and she's going to go through exact same steps for exact same application from exact same laptop. So once Kelly enters her username and password, she again is prompted for a second factor. She provides the security key that she registered. And in this case, she will get denied access because your company policy says that Kelly cannot log in from anywhere outside her own company location. So as you saw, the page that the end user sees is exactly the same that you saw for G Suite. And it is, again, primarily because the whole infrastructure that is used for building context-aware access as a platform is exactly the same for G Suite and for GCP. With that, I would like to invite Adam on stage, who's going to talk about how Deliveroo has enabled context-aware access in their organization today. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Gagan. So I'm the Information Security Officer at Deliveroo, and I'm hoping this session will encourage you to adopt context-aware access and highlight some of the benefits to it. So first of all, I'm going to set the scene. I'm going to talk a bit about why context-aware access for Deliveroo specifically, talk about our implementation journey, and what worked and what didn't, and also what we're looking at in the future. So first of all, who's Deliveroo? Deliveroo is a British tech startup, and it was founded by Will Shu and Greg Orlowski 6 years ago now. And we're a multi-sided business, so we engage with restaurants, quite a few of them, actually, all the riders that we partner with, and consumers. And we operate in 13 different markets across the world, and each one has a presence from an office point of view. So we have employees accessing our data from all across the world. A bit about Deliveroo's architecture. Our products are primarily actually in AWS, and we have some minor usage of GCP for some non-critical applications as well. For collaboration, we mainly use G Suite. And for device management, which I'll reference again later, we use Jamf for our Mac estate, Intune for our Windows estate, and Google for Chrome OS. So what does Deliveroo classify as a secure device? We want to know the serial number, and we want to know the owner of that device as well. We want to make sure that there's a screen lock enabled on it. We want to say you must have a password of a certain complexity, and that the device is actually encrypted so that if there's any data on it, that it's secure. We also want to know that the patch management of it is actually up to date, and they've been rolled out, and nobody's actually clicking that button to ignore the update. We also want to make sure that we've got some endpoint detection and response on the device so that actually if something goes wrong, we're aware of it and we can act. We want to make sure that actually it's a company-owned device and not a personal laptop, because actually that's not something that Deliveroo actually permits right now. It's something that we're going to look at in the future. But we do use things like Google device policy for mobiles, so people can actually bring their own mobile device along. And actually, Chrome OS is actually being issued as the preferred device across the company at the moment, mainly to non-engineers, though, just because it's inherently more secure with things like verified boot enabled, and the fact that you don't need endpoint detection and response on it, and the configuration management software that you need to operate it. And both of those actually have a cost to it as well. So context-aware access was compelling to Deliveroo for 4 main reasons. One of them, we set out a key metric that we wanted to know 100% of the devices are connecting to our services. And if you think about it right now, if someone tried to use their personal laptop to access G Suite services, would you know about it? And it's a perfectly good question to ask, especially from the security point of view. And we have a range of partners that Deliveroo work with, especially around the customer support side of things. And they work in a specific location in a specific country. And context-aware access provides you with the ability to actually restrict it to a specific IP address so that when those partners go home, they can't access it from their home devices, and they're actually on their secure laptops from the company that they're working for. And Deliveroo doesn't use a VPN like a lot of traditional companies do. We're really fully SaaS, and everything's in the cloud. We don't have any on-prem apart from maybe printers. And we can always provide that. We always can do with that extra context as well. So Chrome OS is also context-aware access enabled by default as well, which actually encouraged us to actually up our game on Windows and Mac. So when it came to getting started, there's 2 key pieces: the endpoint verification Chrome extension and the native helper. And I'll go through a bit about how we went through rolling this out. So initially, we rolled out the native helper agent behind the scenes using Jamf and Intune, so that actually users didn't know that it was being there, and later on, it doesn't actually require an additional click to download and install. And then we went on and we used the Chrome browser management to actually force install the extension to all our managed devices as well. And this really allowed people to have a smooth installation for all signed-in Chrome users, but actually didn't help us for all the devices that were not signed in to Chrome and, say, using Firefox or Safari. So then, as well, at that point, it's always good to actually enforce endpoint verification for all new employees, so you're not chasing your own tail, and you're not trying to remediate something that could have been solved when they're coming on board. And actually, from the cultural aspect, they're used to it immediately, and it's not like you're enforcing something new on them. So then we were at the point where we were requiring users to actually click on the extension and click agree. So notoriously, users don't always do these things. And one of the key things that we had to do was start looking at enforcement to make sure that we had the full enrollment that we wanted. So we then used an access policy that required endpoint verification present to be allowed to allow access to G Suite. But we didn't actually block all of our services. We only blocked Calendar and Drive because they need to get in contact with us somehow. So we left them with email. And on top of that, we rolled out gradually over a certain period of time, so we didn't impact every region at once, and then have a load of support come in if there was any issues. So at that point, we were able to verify our devices against the inventory that we had, and we were able to actually enforce our policy if we found any devices which are being used outside of our policy, which is that you're not allowed to use your personal device for work purposes. I mean laptop. And then we actually had to issue a few new devices for those devices that weren't supported, and I'll come on to that in a second. So what really worked as part of the context-aware access rollout, we really got instant visibility, and we were able to act on the numbers that were provided to us. For example, how many devices in what region had endpoint verification and which ones didn't. And that allowed us to actually organize support. So if we had to do out of hours for our offices in Australia, we could actually be online because actually our IT support is 9 till 6, say, in the UK. So we would have to provide that out of hours support. So having those numbers is really critical to understand how many people might actually be in touch. So if you said that 20% of the users had endpoint verification installed, but 80% didn't, you'd actually know that there may be a lot of support that comes through. So to help resolve all of that support issue, on top of that, we made sure that we had a lot of comms that went out, and that went through all social media or all mediums across our company, and that was internal social media, emails on specific regional rollouts, and actually we created a dedicated Slack channel just for the purpose of endpoint verification to make sure that people could actually have a dedicated place to come and reach us at. And then at the same time, we would also always try and provide people the ability to self-resolve these issues. So by providing them a playbook that tells them, actually, just make sure that you've clicked enable and accept the privacy policy from endpoint verification, actually helped us resolve a lot of the issues, as well as doing things like ensuring that sync is on between Chrome and your G Suite. And then something important as well is actually to make sure that you have a process defined for handling exceptions. So for instance, if there's an unsupported device that context-aware access or the native helper does not support, then you need to be able to put someone in a different OU to have that exception in place so that they can still do their day-to-day job, whilst you go about resolving that through the normal IT routes. So I want to go into a bit of detail about what didn't work and what could have been a bit better for us. And I think some things are summarized on this slide, and really it's around the fact that a few things were blocked by context-aware access, and this is important to consider and the impact to your users. So enabling context-aware access for Google Docs blocked access over mobile web because it doesn't provide the context back. And so this worked for things like the mobile apps for Sheets, for Docs. You can still access all the core systems that you need to access. But it caused some friction for people who wanted to use Google Forms, which is still part of Google Docs and doesn't have a dedicated app. So to get around this, we also did some work to enable people to still use Forms, but actually from using Google App Maker to create a custom form ourselves to get around that and actually enable it. So it's all these things that really help you sort of push it through and create less friction for your users while still keeping security at the forefront. So only Chrome is supported from endpoint verification perspective at the moment, and that means that people can't use browsers. So you should actually consider the people using things like Firefox or Safari and what work needs they may have for doing that. Most of them are not related to G Suites, but there may be some related to specific applications that you have. So consider that when you want to put them behind context-aware access, including the IAP. So we had some old devices in our fleet as well. So there were some issues around support for Windows 7 and 8. These were actually good to highlight and actually helped us refresh those devices and bring them in line with our expectation from an inventory point of view. And there was limited logging into denied access events, which kind of prevented us from actually debugging and looking at what the problems were that people were facing. And then we had a piece where actually we were shipping Chromebooks directly to our remote offices in different regions. And this meant that people actually missed that enrollment step. So instead of going through the enterprise login, they were logging in through their normal domain, and that meant that actually we weren't getting a serial number back from our devices, and it meant that we had to actually come up with something inventive to try and resolve this issue in a more automated and more automated fashion, and look with enablement at heart. So we came up with an extension that would actually pop up based on the criteria of the device. So if we didn't get the serial number back, we would actually trigger a extension to be installed on their Chromebook and actually pop up, ask them for the serial number to provide us that context so we can check against our own inventory to make sure it is actually a company laptop, and then actually encourage them to go through the process and troubleshoot the problem themselves. So we would provide them the playbook to actually resolve the issue via email, and if they then didn't do that, we could get in touch, but actually it resolved a lot of the issues for us without having to actually be involved with this. And I hope that actually we're going to be able to open source this piece in the future as well. So please check out our engineering blog in the next few weeks. So future requests from our side is actually a few of them are already done, which is great. So we wanted some more audit logging capabilities around the access denied events, information around the users, and the policies that we were enforcing and what was not working. So Linux support, we still have a range of engineers that use Linux, so we wanted to actually bring context-aware access to them as well. Custom messaging, so you would have seen on Gagan's demo earlier around the custom messaging that was provided. Before that wasn't there, so we couldn't tell them to actually, hey, go to this Slack channel. So we had to rely on the other comms even more to get them the right engagement from our users. And then we really do want some more external troubleshooting information for administrators, like, hey, why is this person getting rejected? Is it because their device is not encrypted? Is it because their OS version is out of date? It all helps us in debugging and providing better experiences to our users. And some more APIs from the context-aware side would also be helpful. If we want to block a bulk load of devices, we want to be able to do it through an API and programmatically rather than through hundreds of clicks through the UI. So that would be super helpful. We'd like Firefox support for other users in the business so that they can actually use another preferred browser. Forms on mobile would be great. And also something that we would be super helpful for Deliveroo is actually having context-aware access for SaaS-based apps. So if you think about Workday and Salesforce, Twilio, anything that may be through SAML or OAuth, if we can apply context-aware at that point, it would really close the gap on people potentially accessing those systems outside of their work devices. So what's next for Deliveroo? We want to refine the policies that we're implementing a bit more. We can do things like implement a minimum OS version and make sure that we're actually on top of the patch management side of things and bring it in line with context-aware access. So like Gagan said, if a vulnerability does come out, we can actually protect our data that little bit more. So context-aware access for our internal apps is also something that we really want to pursue as well. So we're going to pilot identity-aware proxy on a grab-and-go web application that we developed, and then evaluate it for a wider rollout across the organization and understand the potential impacts on that and our infrastructure, because everything is in AWS, so putting Google in front of it would be an interesting conversation. And then eventually we want to actually enable our users to actually use their own devices, and this goes for contractors or employees. We don't want to force contractors who are working in a country supporting some sales team to use our own laptops and send one to them, because then we've got to maintain that cycle of the IT side. So we want to be able to enable BOID and actually restricting access based on the context of the device and the person using it will be super useful. So that's it from my side on Deliveroo, and I just wanted to give some props to the IT team, especially Elliot Shafi, who's in the audience, for leading the implementation of this. And I encourage you to check out our engineering blog and careers. And thanks, and I'll hand over back to Sam.
Thank you, Adam. So I hope we left you with a sense of what zero trust access is, what drives it, and a concrete feeling for what you will get if you implement it with our tools, with the demos Gagan showed, and probably the highlight of what we talked about Adam's presentation about what a real-world rollout looks like. And having said that, let's talk about, if you want to get started, what might be a way to go? And so this is a new form of access, but the way to think about it is like evolution and not revolution. You're not saying rip out the VPN, change everything, ditch the perimeter, nothing like that. You can overlay the solution where it solves some kind of pressing initial use case for you. So you can pick some particular use case. Obviously, driving use case for Adam and the Deliveroo team was basically the G Suite use case. You can try that, and you can see how carefully they staged it. There was no real disruption. You can start with a small group and so on. Another use case which happens is that you have an internal application which you want some external entity to have access to in a very convenient way, which is not possible today. So sort of taking the intranet application, extranetizing it. And you can do that pretty much sort of, in quotes, instantaneously with like putting it behind entity-aware proxy. And basically, so if you do that, basically, let's say, I'll just take an example. Let's say some contractors need to access an application from the outside. Put entity-aware proxy. First, try it out with a small group of your own users to see how it feels, what the latencies are, what questions come up in your team. Have very simple access rules initially, maybe just rules which are based on user group. Haven't even device status as yet, so only this team can access it. So you can get a feel for how the rules engine works. And run a pilot. Basically, maybe get a couple of the contractors to use it, find real-world issues from when they are far away, what happens. And then you can layer on additional security. So for example, you can have IP rules, which you saw, device rules, which you saw, or you can layer on MFA. So one thing which I referred to in the beginning of the talk was like this option that you have with our login system, which is called security key, based on these standards by FIDO. It's really like a open standards anonymous smart card, and it basically gives you a login which is inherently designed to not be phishable. So it's a very high grade of security relative to any other MFA you can use today, because just by the nature of things, anything, a push notification, OTP, they can be phished if it really matters. So anyway, you can try an MFA. Maybe you have a production application. No one should ever see this dashboard except my NetOps people, but I want to see it for them to see it from anywhere, because in a crisis, I never know where Jim or Sally might be. Well, you can make it accessible to Jim or Sally from their phone, but they have to use a security key, things like that. And after the initial pilot, you can grow into production. You can bring more applications in. And in the Google experience, if we did essentially this, and we grew to thousands of applications, and in the end, we keep shrinking the use case for older forms of access, our employee access for VPN, to the point where we have a vanishingly small use case. There'll always be something. There is some HVAC system, which basically is only needs a Windows 95 client. But you can contain those to a very small number of people who can use it. And so at this point, when we live in Google, we live all web, in fact, very much like Deliveroo does. Basically, there's no difference between the intranet and the internet for us. And once again, I'll point out that it's not that we got rid of the perimeter. We made the perimeter much stronger. We shrank it to be just around our application servers and essentially cut off all access except at the application layer where we know who's doing what. So with that, we have some time for questions, and if I could invite Adam and Gagan to come and join me on the stage. Yeah, please go ahead. Android support? Yeah. So the question is, what are your plans for Android support? So right now, a browser-based application, it will work through, obviously, any browser. So we have an example of a use case where a major retailer wanted access to a line of business application for their store stuff and roaming the store floors and from Android devices, and that works through a browser, and it only works within the stores. That's an example. However, you're probably talking about applications, and we have essentially a context-aware access also subsumes device management capability that we have. And so today, at least for our first-party applications, the use case which, for example, Adam showed on the computer, which is unless this is a in reasonable shaped laptop don't allow Gmail, you can do the same thing in Android, where you can basically say, for example, unless this has a screen lock, and unless it's not jailbroken, unless it's locked, don't allow Gmail, and that's something you can do today. So we essentially have an app extension for these, and it also works on iOS. Yeah, please go ahead.
Hi, thanks for showing the demo. One thing I'm actually quite interested in is that you've got the context-aware manager and the proxy on the edge of the system. Could we deploy this solution in a VPC service perimeter for internal applications instead?
You mean, when you say that, do you mean it's inside your perimeter of your, within your WAN? Is that what you mean, within your own network?
So I'll give you a use case here, if I may. We've got an application which is a server-based or a machine-based application, or credential, apologies, making an internal call to a target system. I'd like to apply policy which says that this resource, be it BigQuery, a GCS bucket, for example, may only be accessed by this object at this time or location, or whatever context I wish to program in the device, which then protects me from insider risk.
Yeah, so that's essentially an API call to GCS, right? Is that, and that's the...
Yeah, that could be one. It could be another application I'm hosting.
You substantially can apply these. In fact, you can, the short answer. There's a thing called VPC service control. I know we have a little bit of alphabet soup, but that's what you should look for in the documentation.
Yeah, that's the actual problem, because it doesn't apply to serverless functions.
I'm sorry?
It doesn't apply for your serverless functions.
Serverless functions as yet.
Yeah, so as a result, can I use this to broker the connection?
You know, I'll connect you to Grant, who is here in the front, and we should have a deeper conversation about this. In fact, he is the lead architect for VPCSC. And anyone else interested in the topic, please stay back to talk to Grant.
Okay, we're just going to come over there first.
Thanks very much. A question for the Google guys. Could you talk a bit more about wider browser compatibility? So I noted Adam had on his slides Firefox compatibility. That's hopefully on a roadmap at some point. And also, is the support for the enrollment using the Chrome Web Store add-in, is that for Chrome only, or is that for Chromium-based browsers? I.e., could we, for instance, expect Microsoft Edge-based Chromium to, out the box, use the same application add-in?
Shall I take that, Gagan?
Yeah, so currently it's based on the Chrome browser, so the plugin works on the Chrome browser only. But yeah, we're looking at other pieces as well.
Yeah, in fact, add a little bit more color to that. The reason why it's Chrome only is because essentially what we need to do is, in the context of being signed in, we need to report session data. Basically, we want to say, Sally is signed in on this Macintosh, and in the context of the session, please attach information to the session saying it's a Macintosh and it's got a screen lock. And it as so happens that Chrome is integrated into our identity system, so you're signed into Chrome, and we have this mechanism to decorate the session with more information. We don't have that mechanism at this point in other browsers, but it's conceivable, and we fully recognize, in fact, despite creating Chrome, we believe in a multi-browser world. So it is very high on our radar as to what to do. And as far as whether this is Chromium or Chrome, my guess is it's Chrome only, but I wouldn't, we can get to the exact answer.
Thanks for your presentation. A question I have around the demonstration on the coffee shop access. So when the user actually had that failed message, there wasn't really any feedback for the end user to actually understand why they'd failed. So, you know, it might be actually useful to actually get some kind of thing. You're accessing from a location that hasn't been authorized or that kind of thing. Is there a mechanism that the user can get feedback? Because otherwise you're going to get lots of support requests.
Yeah, it's a good question. Gagan, why don't you take
Yeah,
it? Maybe your thoughts on
so
that.
I think what Adam mentioned, when they rolled out, there was no capability to specify these custom messages to your end users. When we went GA with the product, we actually introduced this capability. So you can actually specify what you want to convey to your end users. And again, depends on the companies. You may want to specify and tell them exactly what your company policy is, but for various reasons, you might choose to not disclose every information, every policy that you have for your company. So the inbuilt capability right now is you can actually specify that, yes, if you want to give more detailed steps on how users should do it, you can point them to your intranet site or something else. Or if you want to just specify contact Bob at admin.com or whatever it is, you can specify that and they can reach out, right? So it really depends up to you how much information you want to share about your policies with your end users. And this capability you can apply on OU by OU basis. So maybe your engineering department, you want to share more steps that they can take on their own versus some other department where you actually just want them to contact you.
Adam, what was your experience with this in real life?
I think it was an interesting one because we didn't actually have that message. But it actually wasn't a stopper or a blocker, or it didn't really create that much friction because of the amount of comms that we did, and that those comms were successful, really. People knew to come to the Slack channel, or they knew someone that would know to come there. And like communication to, say, office managers or key people within the company will really help that process as well. So I don't think that although it's nice to have that custom message, because now we say, actually go to that Slack channel if you do have issues, that it's really not strictly necessary for a successful rollout.
Yeah, but having said that, we have gotten this response. It's on our roadmap to improve things. But our one thing which and I don't know whether you agree with this, Adam, even more feedback we got was when things get denied, on the give tools for the admin to understand what happened, and that's something we're working actively on. So at least when you're watching the green screen on the other side, you'll say, hey, lots of people in Germany and they all seem to have gone for a conference and nobody gets access. You can see that right there, whatever.
Yeah, even something like being able to measure the number of laptops that would be affected by a policy would be awesome.
Thank you very much. I'm just trying to find out the issues you found when you were implementing it with Deliveroo. Were you able to monitor every single movement? And you said you couldn't do some things, and some things you were able to achieve. I'll be very interested in seeing how user specification played out with implementation.
Could you be a bit more specific around the monitoring side?
Yeah, assuming that you had an app that could overlay Google Maps, in which case you can locate every single movement of your men in the field.
So we didn't get the context of, say, someone's device location specifically. I mean, we probably could have through other means of other management, but we mainly used the context that endpoint verification was providing us, so information around whether there was a serial number, whether it was encrypted, and using that information tied with all of our other device management software to create a bigger profile of what created more value for us in the sense of communication or remediation to issues. So if we knew like a specific OS was problematic, we could then go and target those users really quickly. But there wasn't anything like specific around like security monitoring of individual behavior or anything like that we were actually looking at.
Yeah, I think to add to that, the things that we showed on endpoint verification are the things that you actually get to see from the device, right? So like whether the encryption is on, whether the password is on, what is the OS version, and things like that. And the second thing is the IP of the user, which anyway gets sent to the browser for the connection. So those are the two things that get sent. Yes?
I think we have time for one more.
Thank you for the presentation. Are there any parts of those, like the policies, that have like a kind of a deny function? So instead of saying, oh, you must have this device profile, you must have this OS, you must have this whatever feature, can you have, well, actually you can have all of these features, but you cannot have, this particular version of an OS?
Not yet. Essentially, one thing I'll say is that the rule system is essentially based on an IAM system below. And yeah. You're getting denied?
Yeah. So I think when we were setting up that access level, I only showed the version where you are actually allowing based on certain conditions. There is an equivalent not around it, which is block if these conditions are met. So you can actually apply whether it's allowed or not allowed based on any of the conditions that we described.
I was interpreting your question in a slightly different context of having a deny semantics in rules, but what Gagan said is a relevant answer.
Okay, I think we're almost out of time, but we'll take one more maybe, and then we can catch up at the back of the stage.
Sorry, I just want to ask another question, actually. So from a Deliveroo perspective, given that the technology was relatively immature compared to competitors out there in the market space, what made you choose using this tool versus some other context-aware access competitor? And how much support did you get from Google overall during implementation?
I'll answer the second part first. And really, there wasn't actually much support required from Google. Like what they provided us worked in the way that they actually described. I think the reason why we chose context-aware access is because it's built into the Google ecosystem, and we're invested in that, right? We use G Suite as our primary collaboration suite, and I think that's one of the main reasons why we pushed ahead so swiftly with context-aware access, because it ticked all the boxes for us, and it was fully integrated, and there's no compatibility issues because it is all Google.
All right, I think we are out of time, but we are happy to stay around for another few minutes. If anybody has questions, please feel free to come and get us.